Sam, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited for this one.
My audience really wants to see you back, and I think a lot of them really appreciate the speed discussions. Everyone just wants speed, it seems.
They do, and it's nice to bring honest information about speed. Let's get rid of the shiny, the faff, and the bullshit. Basically, let's make some things happen.
Yeah, that's why you and I align so much. We really want to try and keep things simple and actionable, especially for the youth female athlete of today. A lot of them listen to this podcast, their parents, their team coaches as well are trying to
Mm.
sprinkle in speed into the schedule. And I get asked a lot about sprinting mechanics, running form, and how much does it impact speed and how much should athletes work on it? Is it realistic to do it several times a week given schedules? So maybe we can just start off with how impactful are mechanics in speed and also the injury reduction side of speed. So we'll just start there.
Yeah, that's a great question, a really a useful question to be asking, especially with regards to the developing athlete and the maturing athlete. So, one thing I always like to say to parents and youth coaches is, listen, the you learn to walk by the age of 2. So you have gait ingrained. It's not just ingrained in you, it's ingrained in your DNA. Putting one foot in front of the other is the thing that separates us from chimpanzees. Okay, so we can stand upright and we can walk. So there is an inherent learned biomechanics towards this. And so the question is, um, will athletes be able to run and improve their speed without working on mechanics? Of course they will, especially with the time poor athlete. And let's be honest, female soccer players and other athletes, they're not sprinters. So speed is a tertiary demand and a tertiary priority, and I'm more than happy to say it. And we talked about it last time. Anything that's not speed, that's below it, should be training to develop speed. So weight room and all that sort of stuff should be trying to develop everything. You draw a line like on your base speed, and then above it, speed prepares the athlete to prepare for sport. Sport preparation prepares the athlete to prepare for the games, because winning is the only thing that matters. And so if we're doing things that are detracting from the ability to prepare for the sport, let alone compromising the game, then we've got a problem. So when we're looking at developing mechanics, what we're really trying to ask is there much weight in enhancing mechanics, or spending much time enhancing the biomechanics like you would an elite level sprinter? And arguably, no. If you've got an athlete who is growing, let them grow. Let them grow, do your basics, okay? And there's a high degree. So with certain exercise, the way that we create transfer for your listeners, Erica, is that we either do it by developing other motor ability of the athlete, so their strength, power, the biomotor abilities, or developing their coordination. Now, if there's a soccer coach listening to this, they'll know how to develop the coordination of striking a football, or we hope. So that's the same relationship. It's just skill acquisition. So you would use specific exercises that would help develop coordination of that given task. And that's all that you need to do. And then let the magic happen, because then we'll have to take running in a straight line. And then you've got to do it dribbling a soccer ball. So you then have to adapt it to the task itself anyway. So hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah, I know we discussed last time, and you had mentioned something along the lines of let the clock do its job, especially for
Oh,
those
absolutely.
growing female athletes, ages 9 to 12, 9 to 13, when they're in that growth spurt time frame. So you would say instead of getting too detailed with mechanics, then they should be doing a variety of motor skills like jump
Hmm.
roping, for example, or
Yep.
bear crawling, those types of things to build
Yep.
that coordination that will translate to better mechanics. Is that
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's that fundamental coordination because for female athletes and young girls, it's even trickier because they experience peak height velocity a lot earlier than guys and boys, and then you'll have the maturing into a woman when they start the menstrual cycles, and that has an effect on the way that the body grows and changes. So from that early stage, even using like jump rope, amazing, even using stuff like ladders to develop coordination, to just get the brain working. It's not going to improve speed, but it'll improve coordination. And that's the primary goal. And if you have a more coordinated athlete, the likelihood of injury is going to be reduced purely because their brain knows where their feet are on the ground. And that's a huge, huge part of it, you know?
Is there any value in teaching a really young kid how to position their arms for sprinting, or do you think that can wait till later to sort itself
Abs-
out?
yeah, absolutely not. Like I wouldn't bother, if anyone, if you're trying, because it's attentional focus. So how do you keep the attention of a 9-year-old? You know, what's the way to do it?
Task
You can't.
oriented.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So what we can do is I do it with I've been doing a lot, started to do a lot more youth stuff down here in person, and we just say, "Can you march like a soldier, please?" Arms done. Let's go. Next job. And that's all you need because you have to create the associated response that you want and then make it fun. Not go put this arm here and then don't let it come back to there. And if it comes back too high or you're going to slow down, is 9. You've already lost him. He's probably
Right.
trying to pick up a worm. You
Yeah, or
know?
you need like this degree of your elbow, hand
Yeah,
past the hip, hands
yeah,
relaxed. Like it's just too much and it just doesn't land well. It's not stimulating and it's kind of
no.
giving the kid all the answers, I guess.
Yeah, and I've got more involved in some of the youth stuff just because a friend of mine has just taken over his son's football team, and he's like, I was like, me and my coaches, we just send each other from social media. I was like, show me what you send each other, and they send everything that adults do, and so there's a huge disconnect between, and a lot of the stuff that we know on social media isn't good anyway. It's not valid. It's not useful. And the idea with that is that these very, and I'll say this with the utmost respect, these incredibly passionate, energetic, enthusiastic parents as well who took their coaching badges, like my dad did it with rugby with me. He took his rugby coaching, he was a football player, to help. But then what? But then they don't know the next bit. So then they just try to do their best without, and then ultimately they end up making some, in our eyes, fundamental mistakes because they're just trying their best, and I think that's why this conversation is really valid.
Yeah. And I really love that you're doing more work with youth. And I know you also mentioned last time on the other episode that it really takes a special coach to work with young kids, especially when
Mm,
it comes to developing speed and a lot of these motor skills and just making sure that it's fun and they can lean into creativity and solving movement problems because that's what really translates to team sports too, which are very chaotic and involve a lot of
mm,
thinking.
mm,
So, yeah, I always tell parents this, but they still revert back to we want the mechanics coach. We want the full structured session where they're telling our kid exactly what to do and I'm just trying to tell people mentally and emotionally that's not the best thing for your kid.
no, no, not at all. Because what happens when these athletes get into high school, collegiate settings. You know, I think in the states, it's they'll be in the weight room from high school. Over here, it's unless they're in an academy, they'll have access to it, or a private school. But that's when they actually start a lot of the time can train those movement solutions outside of the body because they do too much of that stuff. They start ignoring all the creative and playful elements and just become gym rats, especially with guys more. I think probably in cultural of female sport, correct me if I'm wrong, that there does need to be more education around the importance of weight training and resistance training, but why and when you do it. I had a coach come up to me last week. He's like, I need you to talk to this player because he has literally squatted all of his movement capabilities out of his body. And so that's when it goes too far. So giving our young athletes the freedom to explore, because all game breaking situations are not done by the tactical rulebook. They're done through a half stumble and regather, forward roll, keep dribbling, beat a player with an outrageous turn. Like, these are all creative exploits. You must know, like, the Cruyff turn. Can you train that in the gym? Can you train that type of creativity, which is now a staple in a soccer player's skill set? It's those things that are created through play.
So for the older athletes, like after the female athlete growth spurt, are there any big rocks in mechanics that maybe they should focus on now that they're more matured, or they might have more time on their hands to work on it and they're emotionally ready to have like a more structured session?
Yeah, no, I think that's the big rocks there, and you'll see. Um, so if we first and foremost, if we disregard the way that the pelvic anatomy will change in a maturing female athlete to start off with, because that's a whole different thing. Um, First and foremost, the one big rock that you would want your athletes to be able to achieve is encourage more front side positions, because what happens when athletes grow, they tend to go backside. So they'll spend more time in backside. So for your listeners, their foot will come off the ground and do a big arc round the back, hence the backside, and they don't get enough distance from the knee to the hip, so the femur doesn't come up too far enough or forward enough in our early phases of acceleration or max speed. And that'll slow them down. If they're too backside, we encourage more hamstring injuries and bits and bobs like that. So that would be the big rock, the thing to really focus on. The second thing I would focus on would be specifically more specialized strength means and more specific strength means. Start to spend more time. If you've learned how to squat and you've been doing split squats and doing squat variations, then that's when we can start moving them down the level to then start doing heavier resisted sled work, heavier resisted wall drills. So start to train the athlete in the functional and structural movement patterns of acceleration and change of direction, using those wall drills and just adding more load to target specific muscles. I think that's missed so early on with a lot of athletes. And then the last big rock is to actually, when an athlete starts to get to that age when they've matured, we have a tendency to increase the running volume in athletes for whatever reason, because we've got more time. The goal should be to not increase running volume. We want to optimize running volume. So if you've got a 12, 13-year-old female, she comes back from summer and she's maybe struggling with the training from like a fitness perspective, it's not because she's not unfit. It's because she's grown. And there could be a lot of hormonal things that are going on that will be affecting energy. And that's a huge reality that needs to be met with a compassion and a real conversation. Is what's going on behind the scenes. But then also the last point, if we put the caveat that a young adolescent female going through puberty, the shape of the pelvis is going to change, which is going to alter the way that they're going to run slightly. So that's something to be aware of, and always give that the respect that it deserves. Because of guys don't get it. They just grow. They grow out. They grow up. But women's bodies change, and that takes time to catch up as well. So that's really important to ensure that we address.
What are some of your favorite gym movements other than the sleds that people can really focus on?
Mhm. Yeah, so I guess the most for a lot of people, some of the most accessible things would be to push a heavy sled, push a heavy prowler if you can, pull a heavy prowler if you can, because a heavy load is great to move with locomotion because it just fulfills what we started talking about right at the beginning. So then secondary, if I was to think of like our general weight training movements, I'm a big fan of split squat variations. I think they're really useful. They're more important for the lumbar pelvic strengthening as opposed to leg strengthening because the way that we load the body. Um, and I think you can do on a glute ham raise uh, would be um, absolute paramount. And then calf work. And I think on a resisted calf machine, if you can, Soleil specifically. Um, so if I was to do a gym based, if I was to walk you through quickly like a gym based speed related program, you would start off with like your banded wall drills. You would then push a sled for a couple of sets of 20, 30 meters. You'd then maybe do 2 sets of heavy split squats, do some hamstring holds for 20, 30 seconds, finish on calf and abs, and then you're in and out in under an hour. And that's a great session. And you can do that once a week, once every 2 weeks with a maturing athlete. We don't have to do it every 7 days. The reason why we have a 7 day calendar is so that they can control the work week. The Gregorian calendar doesn't respect biology. A lot of my athletes will lift every 12 to 14 days at certain times of the year. And we have to understand that we have to put stuff in to then recover out from, especially if we've got 2 football practices and a game in a week. They need to sleep and do their homework and have a social life. Let's not forget that.
No, I love that, and also strength is it doesn't wither away as quickly as something
Hmm.
like speed and fast twitch muscle. So would you say
Hmm.
speed, they should be working on that pretty much weekly, obviously, with undulating loads?
Yeah, I would say that. I think there's an interesting argument that some of your listeners may or may not be familiar with the term about residual training effects, where we see
Mhm.
like the detraining of certain qualities, and I think that can be quite misunderstood with regards to team sport athletes because the problem with utilizing that framework is that the we're trying to use a construct that was derived from Olympic sports, not field sports. So with field sports practices is all about it's a mixture of everything. We never actually give the athlete the chance to detrain because they're constantly either overreaching or maintaining. So they're always going to be sprinting at high intensities and high efforts. So the one way that you can get around it, and what I always say to a lot of my athletes, if you can ensure that pre-practice you're hitting some of those big rocks that we've talked about, and then in some of your skill designed sessions, your skill parameters like your pass follow, your box to box stuff, that you're really prioritizing speed of movement and the execution with longer rests, then you're going to keep ticking that over. And strength, um, one of the quotes which is in super training is that, and a lot of hopefully this will land really well with your listeners, is strength is only expressed within the context it's created. So you will have a player who's really weak on the ball but strong in the gym. They're not weak on the ball because they're not strong in the gym. They're weak on the ball because they're not strong on the ball. And that's a different thing. And so that's where, if someone is showing that relationship, they don't need to do more gym work. They need to work at being strong on the ball. The power lifter versus the rock climber they're both very, very strong human beings, but put them in each other's arena, we've got a problem.
Now, let's come back to mechanics. So with the arms, how much does the arm form impact? speed because I've seen some very wacky things with arms just flying all over the place, going above the head, across the body, every which way, especially in the growing female athlete when she's
Yeah.
kind of going through that funky phase where the coordination gets a little bit messy. But how much do the arms impact speed?
So I think, did we get a lot of questions about arms? Do you get a lot of questions about arms?
In female athlete team sports like soccer, lacrosse too, because they're
Yeah.
carrying a stick. They're like, "Well, do my arms even matter because I have a stick?" And I'm like, "Well, that's a fair question to ask."
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It
I
is.
like that question. But yeah, I guess the arms don't necessarily make you faster, and I think that's what people think.
Hmm.
They're
Hmm.
more of
Yes.
a stabilizer and help with
Yeah.
posture, I guess.
Yeah, so for me, they help to create balance. So even when you've got an implement, so I do a lot of work with hurling players, the Irish sport hurling, and they run with a stick, and it's a very similar principle. So if we know the most important part when running fast is the contact between the ground and the foot, that's the first point of contact, the first point of entry. So just like a plane landing, if those front wheels don't hit well, we've got a problem. So we always address everything from the ground up. But then we have the contralateral relationship. So my right arm is responsible for my left leg and vice versa. Because and then the opposite. And without getting too detailed within it, there has to be, and this is why implementation is really interesting because when we use let's take lacrosse or hurling, for example, when our athletes are sprinting with a stick in their hand, they're going to counterbalance with that stick. For those that are listening, I'm moving the stick across my body. So when my left leg comes up, my right arm will go forward. And it's all about the relationship between the upper arm and the leg rather than the lower arm and the leg. And that's where we get the reciprocal angles. And so you'll find there's some counterbalancing going on there. But then for soccer, when people are dribbling, one of the best high speed dribblers that the game's seen in the last 20 years, Cristiano Ronaldo. Would you correct his arms? No, his arms are creating balance for him so he can use his turnover. Like Ryan Giggs, when I was growing up, played on the left wing for Manchester United. He was so fast, but he hasn't got the best arm technique. But when you see someone toe out the ball in front, they're cantering down the wing or through the midfield, they toe out for those 3 or 4 steps where they're not on the ball, they're going to adopt a natural arm movement because they're going to. But then as soon as they get back on the ball, close quarter dribbling, the arms will drop, the center of mass will drop, and we'll be in more control because we had to control the implement. So it's about the times, are we efficient when we are not on the ball versus how are we balancing when we are on the ball? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I like what you said there about how sometimes the fastest athletes we watch
Mm.
don't really have the best mechanics,
Hmm. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
their muscles are just able to fire fast,
Hmm.
whether
Yeah. Yeah.
that's genetic or the type of like gym or jump training they've done, or a combination
Mhm.
of those. So that's also really interesting in the mechanics discussion of, okay, well, what's most impactful here in
Yeah.
speed? Because fast athletes don't always look like good mechanics.
Well, exactly, and speed on the field is not the same as speed on the track. It's so different, and what will get no, you put yourself like my friend's dad. No, my friend who is the dad that's coaching. He's looking on social media for like speed things. You type in speed on TikTok, and you get in sprint training workouts, and then they'll go, "Well, this person says it," and it's like, "Well, can that person kick a fucking football?" No. And that's what's really important for parents and sport coaches to really understand is if you're a sport coach listening to this, start asking your questions, figure out the ways that how can my athlete do this better with the ball, not taking them out of sport practice to try and teach them something to then teach them to do it again in sport practice. We don't have time for that.
Mhm.
We can whole it in session, and we can use, coaches like yourself to outsource an off season and maintain through in season, and reinforce it. But the winning and losses are done on the field, and so that's where we have to always keep in mind. And I do feel for parents, because it's a minefield, um, to try and get the right advice.
Or they can also look for a speed or performance coach, especially for the young ones, and I would argue for the older athletes too, but not just doing speed where it's run fast all the time, but
Yep,
it's more contextual or reactive, and they're
yep,
working in a small group or reacting to a partner, and just that thinking component is within
hmm.
it. I don't know if
Oh
you
yeah.
get asked this a lot now that you're working with youth, but a lot of parents are like, "Oh, she's just slow to the ball," or "She just has that
Hmm.
lack of urgency in her first step," and they think it's a mechanics issue, like, "Oh, we need to
Hmm.
work on wall drills and her acceleration form," and I'm like, "Man, that those first few steps, that can be a thinking issue too."
Yeah, yeah,
So, I
without a
don't know if you
doubt.
get that question a lot, but that's a big one in the youth space.
Yeah, it's huge, and even at the senior level, because there is a huge misunderstanding with regards to, because we're binary individuals. Like, we need things to be like super simple, and sport is really grey. So we want, well, what's the logical solution for this? Well, if they're slow to the ball, they need to do more speed work. But they're fast, and then you see this as well. They're fast. They're fast enough. So I actually wrote a whole section of it in my book about the understanding between the vision and the way that the brain communicates that to the body, not through, perception action, but through functional neurology. Um, because yes, there is that skill acquisition element, but how the brain processes that information. And then one of the things I do with a lot of the senior guys, more so, um, is show them the right looks. So what we call, and you can do this with younger athletes as well, but again, attention is attention. So you be more like games for young kids, but for the pros, it's like, what looks have you got in the game that you line up and you see all the time? So what are the pictures that your brain is used to seeing? And then so when I see that picture, I then know my adjustments. So like in American football, they do it really well. Like, a good quarterback knows his reads, knows his pictures, and can pass accordingly. Soccer athletes, rugby players, they will be seeing those pictures. We're just not showing them enough. There was um, a really good try, a rugby try in the last World Cup in Paris from Argentina. It's the one example I actually use in the book. The Argentinian fly half changed direction over. It was over 15 meters away from the defenders, two defenders, and he beat both of them. But because he controlled the space and he made the attacking decision, close the space, shut the time down for the defender, they didn't know the picture. He just walked through the gap. And it was like, you freeze frame, he's miles away. It's like, how did that happen? Well, it's not a skill issue, it's not a speed issue, it's a thinking issue. And it's great, because that's then you can be creative, and as performance coaches can work with technical coaches and say, where are they? Because a lot of athletes, I think I said it before, a lot of athletes will come to me and they say, I want to get faster. I say, well, why? Why do you want to get faster? And they will always give me a tactical reason why they think they're not fast enough. Maybe you just don't understand the game well enough. And if we can put 1%, and for all your listeners as well, a 1% increase in speed that's used on the field is astronomical. It's a huge game. It's a huge game. If you're my senior guys, let's say, if you can run over 9.5 meters per second inside 40 meters, you're fast enough. So that's 22 mile an hour, there or thereabouts. You are fast enough within that distance that's relative. Now we get to work.
That's so true. Yeah, any incremental improvement is a huge deal in speed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you're listening and your athlete is training with a speed coach now, or they just started their speed journey, please give it time, keep showing up, and stick with it. There's so many aspects to speed. I mean, we talked about mechanics today, getting in the gym, getting exposed to different situations with speed. It's a lot to work on. It's
Mm.
all as advanced as working on your soccer, lacrosse, or basketball skills. It's a lot of time commitment, but just keep showing up and commit to it for the year and beyond. So
Yeah. Yeah.
go ahead.
That's no, I was going to say, like, it's that long term journey. It is the long term journey. The things that change quick are the things that aren't going to be the most important, because if they change quick, likelihood they were just easy to change anyway.
Yeah.
So, the things that need maturing, and to grow with the athletes are really important. And if you were to really contextualize it, like my friend, his son is 5, and he's like, I want him to be the next England goalkeeper. And he knows that in his brain. Is it like he's 5, but what he wants him to feel like is that he could be. And that's really empowering for the developing athlete, is that you give them that opportunity to experience all of those things that go along the way with training well and preparing well and winning and losing. And it just takes time. And if you're, especially if you've got a scholarship riding on it and you've got to do a combine, for example, some of the girls that you work with later down the line, then that's when it starts to become a little bit more serious, because it could be a career. But the career, if you do all the things that we've talked about before that, then you don't have to worry by the time you get there, because you're pretty much done. And then all you have to do is peak for a combine. If they do, I think they do female soccer combines. Am I right?
I don't know actually. I don't
But
think they do.
but they so for any trial, exactly, then it makes sense. But for any kind of trial situation, you're already there. They gloat about all these 40s in the NFL and just all that
It's
nonsense. But
important in college sports. A lot
yeah,
more like D1 programs are starting to get 40-yard dash times and jump height and all that. So
yeah, and then it's just a numbers game, and they're really easy to change, because if you give an athlete 3 to 4 months just to focus on running fast in a 40-yard, if they do all the work before, like we said, that's really easy. It's not rocket science, but you just have to be ready to do it. Um, and I don't think people might like me saying that, because 40s are glorified globally, but they're very simple.
yeah, they really are. That's a whole other episode.
Yes, yeah.
I guess to wrap this up, I have a surprise question I ask guests now that the podcast is the Strong Female Athlete podcast, no longer Soccer Queens. We cater to all sports on here because a lot of it is similar with general athleticism. But how would you define a strong female athlete?
Strong. Okay, so do you know what? I've worked with a couple of strong female athletes, and there's one that comes to mind, and her name is Emma Uren, and she pretty much tore her hamstring off the bone 18 months before the Olympics, before the Tokyo Olympics, during COVID, and she had nowhere to rehab. The national program abandoned everyone, and the biggest thing that she showed me is belief. And she got to the Olympics. She made it to the Olympics, and she is now the captain of the Great Britain female sevens rugby team. And it is when everyone said, when everything's down, she had the belief within herself that she's gonna push it as hard as she can, irrespective of whatever. And that, for me, belief is huge.
I love that. That's going to be really encouraging for many listening. And if you're maybe sidelined now, that mental aspect is so big. and just that faith in the future that it will get better. I
So
love that.
I'll tell you something quick, Erica, just before we finish. We were meeting up during COVID and training. She was training at my parents' house in our shed gym and stuff like that. But she went to Sweden where she lives, and she'd send me pictures where she was doing hand supported split squats on a park bench with her sister on her shoulders. And that's how she got it done. And that I was when I saw that picture, I was like, we haven't got a problem.
Yeah.
She's doing it.
I love that. And gosh, that's such an important message because at that level and to be a champion and a leader, you have to be willing to do things like that.
Hmm.
You can't be making excuses. Well, I don't have equipment, or I don't have a facility, or it's too cold out, or it's drizzling outside. No one cares.
Yeah,
You're not going to be a champion if you have that mindset.
yeah. Put a coat on.
Yeah. And put your sister on your shoulders if you need load.
Yes.
It's so creative,
Absolutely.
and I think with that belief from her, I think she also sounds like she had adaptability.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
think that's
Tough
key
cookie.
too. Yeah, that's awesome. Great story to
Yeah.
end on. Well, Sam, thank you. This was awesome. I will include Sam's book as well since he discussed some drills and things to look out for. They're all in his book. So be sure to grab it. I've read it probably 3 times now because it's very in depth, but check it out in the caption, and I'll see everyone on the next episode.